At 2:11 in the morning, my younger sister set the keys to my SUV on my kitchen table and told me she had hit someone. My mother did not ask if the person was alive. My father did not reach for his phone. He looked at me with the same steady expression he used whenever he wanted panic to sound like strategy. "Maddie is running for office," he said. "You always get through things." Then my mother closed both hands around mine. "Evie, just say you were driving." What they did not know was that I had already decided my answer before I knew how much evidence that night had left behind. Maddie had arrived 10 minutes earlier without calling. Her hair was damp with melting snow, and she still wore the navy coat from the fundraiser. She held my keys so tightly the metal had marked her palm. From my front window, I could see the SUV under the streetlight. The left headlight was shattered. The bumper had folded inward near the corner, and a thin crack crossed the lower edge of the windshield. "What happened?" I asked. "Someone stepped out." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you stop?" Maddie looked toward the floor. "Did you call 911? "Nothing." My stomach tightened. Before I could ask again, the elevator doors opened down the hall. My mother, Linda, came first, still wearing the pearl earrings she used for charity dinners. My father, Graham, followed with his overcoat open and his phone already in his hand. Maddie had called him after the crash. Graham stepped inside, shut the door, and looked at all three of us. "Nobody panics," he said. "Nobody calls anyone until we understand what happened. Someone may be lying in the street." And 5 people calling with 5 different stories will not help him. For a moment, the sentence almost sounded reasonable. That was my father's talent. He could take fear, lower his voice, and make control feel like responsibility. I turned back to Maddie. "Who did you hit?" "I don't know." "A man? A woman?" "I don't know." "Evie." Mom moved beside her and rubbed her arm. "She's in shock." "So maybe the person she left behind." "Evie," Mom's tones softened. "You're the calm one. You've always been fine under pressure." The words landed with an old familiarity I could not yet name. "You'll be fine." Somehow, it had followed me through every difficult room of my life. Graham glanced toward the window again. "We need facts before emotion takes over." "No," I said. "We need to know whether someone needs help." Maddie finally looked at me. Her face was pale. But beneath the fear, I saw something else. Expectation. I stepped closer. "Are you asking me to help you tell the truth?" Her lips parted. Then she looked at Dad. That was my answer. "If you're asking me for anything else," I said, "the answer is no." Mom inhaled sharply. Graham's expression hardened. Maddie stared at me as if I had broken a rule she believed had always existed. My phone vibrated on the counter. I looked down. A notification from the dashcam app filled the screen. "Impact event saved. Cloud synchronization pending." Outside, snow moved through the street lamp, softening the damaged hood. Inside, no one spoke. Maddie kept staring at my phone, though she could not see the screen. Dad watched me instead. Mom still held Maddie's elbow, as if the person who needed steadying was standing in my kitchen. Somewhere beyond the walls, sirens rose and faded. I wondered whether one of them was for the person she had left. I read it once, then locked my phone. I said nothing. 7 years separated Maddie and me, which was enough for our parents to decide we were fundamentally different before either of us was old enough to argue. Maddie felt everything in public. When she was happy, everyone knew. When she was frightened, the whole room rearranged itself around her. She could charm teachers, strangers, waiters, neighbors, and later entire rooms of donors. But she also needed reassurance the way some people need coffee in the morning. I was quieter. I studied without being told, found part-time jobs on my own, and rarely brought trouble home. My parents used to say, "We don't worry about Evie." For years, I thought that was praise. At my college graduation, Dad left before my name was called because Maddie had a statewide debate final across town. Mom squeezed my shoulder and said, "You understand, this is important to her." I did understand. That became the problem. When I failed to land the first internship I wanted, I called Mom from a bus stop and told her I was embarrassed. "You'll figure something out," she said. I did. When Maddie lost a student election 3 months later, we had a family dinner to help her recover. Dad mapped out what she should do differently next time. Mom brought her favorite cake. I sat beside her and listened because that was what older sisters did. None of this meant they hated me. They loved me. They simply trusted my ability to survive so completely that, over time, survival became the only kind of care they thought I needed. And Maddie was not always selfish. Years later, when I was still a federal prosecutor, someone connected to a case mailed a threat to my apartment. I told my family I was fine. Maddie drove 3 hours that night anyway. She slept on my couch in sweatpants, ate stale crackers from my cabinet, and refused to leave until morning. Before turning off the lamp, she said, "You don't always have to be fine with me." I remembered that sentence for years because I believed it meant there was one person in the family who could still see the difference between strength and loneliness. But Maddie had her own cage. Dad corrected the way she spoke, the way she shook hands, what colors she wore on camera, which photos she posted, which internships mattered, and eventually which career made sense. "Once, after too much wine at Thanksgiving," she said, "you left, I stayed and became whatever they needed." "I didn't know leaving felt like freedom to you," I told her. She laughed without humor. By 35, Maddie was running for city council on a platform built around safer streets, public accountability, and transparent leadership. Her face was on mailers, yard signs, and a campaign vehicle wrapped in her name. The night of the fundraiser, she asked to borrow my SUV because she believed a reporter or photographer had been following the branded campaign car. "I just want to get home without becoming tomorrow's content," she said. It was not the first time she had borrowed my car. I gave her the keys. There had always been a side to the way our family loved. Dad solved problems by assigning roles. Mom softened assignments until they sounded like kindness. Maddie was the one whose future required protection. I was expected to absorb disruption without making anyone feel guilty. Until that night, I had never seen the pattern written in my father's handwriting, but it was impossible to miss. Back in my kitchen at 2:19 that morning, the remains of my own week were still scattered around the room. An investiture invitation lay half-covered beneath unopened mail. A large envelope from the United States District Court sat near the fruit bowl. A photograph I had meant to frame was turned face down beside it. Mom set her purse directly on top of the envelope. No one noticed. Dad was no longer looking at the damage outside. He had taken a legal pad from my counter and was drawing a line down the center of the page. On one side, he wrote times, on the other, names. He asked Linda where she had been after one. Then Maddie. Then he looked at me. "Who can place you at home between 1 and 2? I lifted my eyes to his, and for the first time that night, I understood exactly what question my father was really asking. Not what happened. Not whether the injured person was alive. He was asking who had an alibi. Graham did not raise his voice. He rarely needed to. He drew another line across the legal pad and started rebuilding the night in neat blocks of time, as if the right arrangement could make the truth less dangerous. "Linda?" Mom answered first. She had been at the Winter Haven charity dinner until almost 2. Dozens of people had seen her there. Photos from the event had already been posted online, including one timestamped at 1:47. Dad nodded and wrote it down. He had stayed at Maddie's fundraiser later than expected. Campaign staff had seen him in the ballroom. The valet system would show when his car left. He had witnesses, records, and a public reason to be exactly where he said he was. Then he turned to Maddie. She had been photographed leaving the fundraiser, but she had not taken the campaign vehicle. She had taken mine. Dad looked at me last. I lived alone. I had no public schedule. No spouse was sleeping down the hall. No roommate had watched me come home. The SUV outside was registered in my name. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The logic was visible. Dad did not need me to be believable forever. He only needed me to be believable long enough to complicate the first hours of an investigation. In his world, uncertainty bought time, and time bought control for the first time. I saw how a family role could become evidence when the wrong person decided to use it. Then Dad said, "I'm not asking anybody to lie." I felt something inside me go still. "The police will naturally start with the registered owner," he continued. "That creates uncertainty whether we like it or not." "It creates a question," I said. "Not an answer." "Exactly." He tapped the pen against the pad. "If Evie simply says she can't remember exactly when she went out." "I remember." His eyes lifted to mine. "I was home." "You're focusing on wording instead of consequences." "No, I'm focusing on whether the words are true." Mom stepped closer. "Maddie could lose everything. Someone else may already have." Her face tightened. "You know what I mean?" "I do. She has spent years building this campaign. And the person she hit spent years building a life." Mom looked wounded by that, as if compassion for a stranger were somehow disloyalty to her. Then she said the sentence our family had used on me for years. "You're stronger than she is." I stared at her. "That doesn't make my life cheaper." Maddie flinched. For 1 second, I thought she understood. Then she folded her arms. "It wouldn't destroy you. You don't know that. You always recover." That hurt more than if she had called me selfish, because she believed it. Dad looked back at his notes. "We are wasting time." I walked toward the kitchen and filled a glass with water I did not want. With my back to them, I opened my phone and sent a message to my court security contact. "Vehicle I loaned to family member may have been involved in serious collision. I am safe. I am contacting local police. Preserve only existing security data. Do not access it outside normal protocol." I sent it before I could second-guess myself. Then I stepped into the pantry, closed the door halfway, and called Denver police. I kept my voice low. I gave the dispatcher the SUV's make, color, license plate, and the approximate route Maddie had described. I told her I did not know where the collision had happened or who had been injured. There was a pause while she checked. "We already have a reported collision that may match that vehicle," she said. "Officers are being sent to your location." My hand tightened around the phone. "Thank you." When I returned to the living room, Dad was still writing. I did not ask Maddie another question. I did not try to trap anyone into saying something worse. I only said, "Do not delete anything. Do not touch my vehicle." Dad's pen stopped. "Stop talking like a prosecutor." "I'm not." Something in my answer made him look at me longer than before. Maddie paced toward the window. "No one even knows what happened yet," she said. "Owen said he didn't see anyone else." The room changed. I turned slowly. "Owen?" Maddie froze. Dad looked up from the legal pad. Mom's hand dropped from Maddie's shoulder. A minute earlier, my sister had insisted she had been alone. Now no one seemed willing to explain who Owen was. Maddie recovered first. I meant Owen texted me. I watched her face. Before or after you hit someone? She said nothing. Mom stepped between us. Why are you interrogating your sister? Because every answer keeps changing. Dad closed the legal pad. That was the moment he stopped trying to fix the timeline and started trying to fix me. You've always resented how much attention Maddie got, he said. I almost laughed. There it was. When facts became inconvenient, my history became evidence. Maddie crossed her arms. You walked away from us. I moved for work. You stopped coming home. I stopped coming home every time I was expected to clean up whatever crisis was waiting. Mom shook her head. Don't make tonight about old wounds. But that was exactly what they were doing. They were taking every old wound I had learned to live with and holding it up as proof that I was bitter, jealous, unstable, difficult. If they could make me look resentful enough, maybe anything I said after that could be dismissed as revenge. Maddie looked at me with a steadiness that frightened me more than her panic had. Let's be realistic, she said. If all three of us say you had the car, who is going to believe you? My stomach went cold. Mom did not correct her. Dad did not say she had gone too far. Maddie continued. Nobody even knows what you do. Dad held out his hand. Give me your phone. No. We need to know what you've already sent. No. His jaw tightened. Evie. I turned toward my office. He followed. Don't walk away from me. I reached the door, put my hand on the knob, and opened it. The room was small, a desk, 2 bookcases, a lamp I had owned since law school, and behind the door, hanging from a wooden hanger, was a black judicial robe. No one spoke. Mom stopped in the hallway. Maddie stepped closer. On the wall above my desk was the framed commission of appointment. Beside it sat a photograph from my investiture. Me in the robe, one hand raised, the chief judge standing beside me. Maddie picked up the edge of the frame without touching the glass. What is that? My commission. Her eyes moved across the printed title. Then she looked at me. You're a judge? United States Magistrate Judge. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had said all night. Mom frowned as if she were trying to retrieve a conversation she had misplaced. You said something about a panel. Yes, I thought it was for some court committee. I told you the court selected me 6 weeks ago. Dad said nothing. I looked at him. I invited all 3 of you to the investiture. Mom's face changed. Maddie had held a campaign fundraiser that evening, the fundraiser they had all attended. The one whose photographs Mom had sent me while I was still answering congratulations from colleagues. Maddie stared at the robe. Why didn't you make us understand? That question hurt more than I expected. I got tired of competing with your calendar for permission to matter. Her expression flickered. For one brief second, I thought shame might enter the room. Then Dad stepped past her and studied the commission. His eyes moved from the seal to my name, then to the robe. I knew that look. He was not reflecting. He was calculating. Finally, he said, "This actually helps." I thought I had misheard him. What? He turned toward me. If a sitting federal judge says she panicked after an accident, people will believe it. Nobody moved. He continued, almost gently. You have credibility. Maddie doesn't have right now. You could say you were tired, distracted. You thought you struck debris. We get counsel involved before anything becomes formal. I stared at my father. For years, I had hidden pieces of my life because no one seemed interested enough to hold them. Now, in less than 30 seconds, He had taken the largest professional achievement of my life and converted it into another asset he could spend on my sister. The robe did not make him proud. It made me useful. Then the doorbell rang. Mom turned toward the entryway. Dad stopped speaking. Maddie went pale. I opened the door. A man in a dark coat stood outside, breathing hard. I recognized him from Maddie's campaign photos, Owen Mercer. The moment Maddie saw him standing there, I knew her lie about being alone had become impossible to maintain. Owen stepped inside without waiting to be invited. His coat hung open, one sleeve twisted at the cuff, and his breathing was too fast for someone who had simply climbed a flight of stairs. He looked at Maddie before he looked at anyone else. The cold followed him into the apartment. Beads of melted snow darkened his shoulders, and his hands shook when he pushed them into his pockets. I had seen him before only in campaign photographs, always polished and smiling beside Maddie. In my doorway, he looked younger, smaller, and less certain of the story he had come to protect. "Did you tell her?" Maddie's face hardened. "Tell her what?" I answered for him. "That you were in my car." Owen went still. Dad closed the office door behind us. For a few seconds, the only sound was the heating system pushing air through the vents. Then Owen looked at me. "I was in the passenger seat," Maddie snapped toward him. "You said you were helping me. I said I wouldn't let you drive home alone." That distinction mattered, I asked. Had she been drinking? Owen rubbed one hand over his face. "Yes." Maddie made a sharp sound of disbelief. "You were drinking too." "I know. How much?" "2 drinks, maybe 3. "And Maddie?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me enough. "I told her to slow down," he said. "More than once." Maddie looked at him as if he had betrayed some private agreement. Dad stepped in. "This is not the time to start assigning blame." "No," I said. "It's the time to stop pretending we don't know who was there." Owen stared at the floor. "After the collision," he said, he had told Maddie to stop the SUV and call 911. They argued. She drove several blocks, then pulled over long enough for him to get out. "You just left?" I asked. "She told me to get out." "And you did?" He nodded. "I went home." "Did you call 911? His shoulders dropped. "No." There it was. Whatever else Owen might become later, he had not been brave when bravery mattered most. I had been afraid of the police, afraid of the campaign, afraid of losing his job, afraid of being seen in a vehicle that had just hit someone. Dad had called him less than an hour later. "He said there might be a camera near the intersection," Owen said. "He told me to come here." Dad's expression did not change. I looked at Maddie. "Come with me." I led her into the kitchen and stopped beside the sink. For the first time all night, I lowered my voice, not as a lawyer, not as a judge. "As her sister, tell me the whole truth now." Her eyes filled. "I mean it. Maddie, no campaign, no dad, no strategy. Tell me what happened. I will not protect you from the consequences, but I will stand beside you while you face them." For 1 second, she looked 16 again, scared, exhausted, wanting someone else to tell her what came next. I thought she might finally choose the truth. Then she whispered, "If I tell you everything, will you at least say you're not sure who was driving?" I closed my eyes. Even confession had become a negotiation. "Maddie, you don't understand what this life has been like. Then help me understand." She wiped at her face. "You think being the favorite made everything easy?" Dad corrected every word I said, every photo, every handshake, every job I took. Mom planned what I wore before events, because apparently people notice whether a woman looks serious enough. I was never allowed to fail privately. Every mistake became a threat to what they were building. I listened, because some of it was true. "I believe you," I said. She looked genuinely surprised. "I believe you were controlled. I believe they put pressure on you that I didn't have." Her mouth trembled. "But being controlled doesn't give you the right to control what happens to me." The words seemed to reach her, but not far enough. Before she could answer, someone knocked on the front door. Not the doorbell this time, 3 firm knocks. Mom stepped into the hallway. I opened the door. A woman in a dark winter coat stood there, badge visible beside her belt. 2 uniformed officers waited behind her. Evelyn Hart? Yes. Detective Elena Ruiz, Denver Police. Mom looked from the detective to me. Her face changed. "You called them?" I met her eyes. "Someone had to." Rebecca Sloan arrived 20 minutes after the police. She came in carrying no visible panic, only a leather folder and the expression of someone who understood how quickly frightened people could make a bad situation worse. "Nobody talks to anybody about what happened unless I'm present," she said. Dad opened his mouth. Rebecca looked directly at him. "That includes you," for the first time that night. Graham Hart stopped trying to run the room. The officers separated us. Maddie went with Rebecca into my office. Owen was placed in the dining area until his own attorney could be contacted. Mom and Dad were kept apart. Detective Elena Ruiz asked me to sit at the kitchen table. Through the apartment walls, I could hear only fragments, a chair moving, Mom asking for water, Dad objecting to something an officer said. No one could coordinate a version now. For the first time since Maddie arrived, each of us had to sit alone with what we had chosen to say, and with what the other rooms might already know. Before she began, I said, "I don't want professional courtesy." Her eyes rested on me for a moment. "You'll get the same interview I would give anyone else." "Good." I told her when Maddie borrowed the SUV, when she returned, what she admitted, what my parents proposed, and when Owen appeared, I did not characterize their motives. I gave names, times, and words as accurately as I could remember them. Ruiz took notes without reacting. Then she closed one page and opened another. "We already had information before we came here." The first piece came from a traffic camera and a residential doorbell camera near the intersection. Neither image was perfect, but together they showed my SUV entering the crosswalk, striking a pedestrian, and continuing down the street. A second camera near the fundraiser showed Maddie getting into the driver's seat. Owen entered the passenger side. The third source was my vehicle itself. The dashcam had preserved exterior video around the impact. The GPS history showed the route. The system also logged approximate speed and the time of sudden deceleration. No single device told the whole story. Together, they were beginning to... Ruiz watched me carefully before continuing. "Your sister also called our non-emergency line before counsel arrived." I felt my hands tighten under the table. "What did she say?" "She said she wasn't certain who had the vehicle after the fundraiser. She suggested you might have taken it later. Not that I might have. It was the kind of sentence designed to leave fingerprints without admitting you had touched anything." "Did she identify me as the driver?" "No. She said she couldn't be sure." I stared at the grain of the kitchen table. Maddie had seen the robe. She knew what a false accusation could do to my work. She had still planted the possibility. Ruiz continued, "We checked your building records." My smart lock showed that I had entered my apartment shortly before midnight and had not opened again until Maddie arrived. A hallway camera supported the timeline. My laptop records showed continuous activity from my home network, including a short video call with a court clerk. After 1, the garage camera showed no sign of me leaving. Ruiz set down her pen. At this point, we have no reason to believe you were driving. I expected relief. Instead, I thought of the dark street outside. Do you know who was hit? Her expression changed. His name is Miguel Alvarez, 59, maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex in West Denver. She told me he had covered a late shift for a coworker whose child was sick. His bus route had been disrupted by the weather, so he had walked the last part of the way home. He was alive. Hai had been taken to the hospital with serious injuries, but his condition was stable. I closed my eyes for a second. Until then, the night had been filled with words like campaign, exposure, career, evidence. Now there was a name, Miguel Alvarez, a man who had simply been walking home. The collision might have happened in a second. Everything after it had been a choice. Ruiz's phone vibrated. She read the screen, then stood. What is it? I asked. Owen Mercer's attorney. Across the room, Rebecca looked up. Ruiz read the message again. He says Mr. Mercer wants to provide a recording made on his own phone after the collision. Rebecca turned toward Maddie. Maddie's face emptied. What recording? She asked. Owen's recording was not heroic. That mattered to me. Hai had not started it because he suddenly became brave, or because he had decided Miguel Alvarez deserved justice. He started it because, after the impact, he looked at Maddie and realized she was no longer thinking clearly, and somewhere beneath his panic was a colder fear. If the night became criminal, she might decide he was easier to sacrifice than herself. So he opened the voice memo app on his phone and pressed record. His attorney turned the file over later that morning. Investigators did not play it for me. They reviewed it through the proper process. And afterward, Rebecca and the attorneys involved were told the portions that mattered. The first was Maddie's voice. Owen said, "Stop the car. Call 911. Maddie answered, "If I stay here, I'm finished." There was noise after that. Tires, breathing, Owen swearing. Then Maddie called Dad on speaker. Graham's first question was not whether she was hurt. It was not whether the person she hit was alive. Whose vehicle? Evie's. According to the summary, there were several seconds of silence. Then Dad said, "Bring it back to her building," Owen interrupted. "We need an ambulance," Dad answered. "Someone will call one." I had heard my father make cruel calculations before. What I had never understood was how quickly he could turn a human emergency into a problem of ownership, timing, and plausible stories. Then came the part that changed the shape of my childhood. Maddie asked, "What if Evie won't help?" Dad replied. "She lives alone. The car is hers. She doesn't have a public schedule. We don't need her to confess right away. We need uncertainty." And then he said it. Evie always survives. I did not feel triumphant when Detective Ruiz later confirmed the recording supported what I had told her. I felt hollow. Dad had chosen me before I knew there had been an accident. Before I saw the broken headlight. Before Mom held my hands. Before Maddie asked me to lie. The decision had not been created in my kitchen. It had already existed inside the family. That realization hurt more than the possibility of being blamed. A false accusation could be disproved. Records existed, cameras existed, time could be reconstructed, but there was no document capable of repairing the knowledge that my father's first instinct had been to measure which daughter was easier to spend. I thought about how often I had mistaken usefulness for love. I was the one who could drive across town, cover a bill, take the difficult phone call, stay calm at the hospital, explain the paperwork, absorb the disappointment every time I managed. The family learned the same lesson: Evie could carry more. No one ever asked what carrying more was costing me. Until that morning, neither had I. Not for long. Evie will be fine. The words moved backward through my life. Dad leaving my graduation before my name was called. Mom telling me I would find another internship. A holiday spent alone because Maddie was having a crisis. The threatening letter from my prosecution years. When I told everyone not to worry. My investiture invitation sitting unanswered while they attended Maddie's fundraiser. For years, I had heard the sentence as confidence. Now I heard the hidden bargain beneath it. They did not think I was worthless. Maybe that would have been easier. They knew I had value. They simply believed my pain was an expense the family could afford whenever protecting Maddie cost too much. By late morning, Dad and I were allowed to speak briefly with counsel nearby. He looked older than he had a few hours earlier, but not ashamed. "You don't understand what I was trying to do," he said. "I think I finally do. I was trying to save your sister." I shook my head. "You didn't decide tonight that I was expendable." His jaw tightened. "Don't use words like that. No, you decided which daughter you could afford to lose." For the first time, he looked directly at me without an argument ready. Then he said quietly, "You would have survived." There it was again. The compliment that had excused every absence. The faith in me that had somehow become permission. I looked at the man who had spent my whole life calling me strong and finally understood why the word had begun to feel like a debt. "That's the problem," I said. "You spent my whole life calling survival proof that hurting me was safe." The first public statement came from Maddie's campaign before noon. It did not mention guilt. It said she was suspending campaign activity because of a serious personal and legal matter and would cooperate with counsel and investigators. By the next morning, the suspension became a withdrawal. Endorsements disappeared from the campaign website. Several major donors announced they would make no further contributions. The treasurer began winding down the committee and reviewing what funds could be returned or lawfully spent on outstanding obligations. There was no national spectacle, no crowds outside our parents' house chanting her name, just local reporters, political statements, and the quiet speed with which people moved away from a candidate whose message had depended on public trust. Rebecca advised Maddie to correct her earlier statement and stop trying to preserve possibilities. The evidence had already closed. She did. The criminal case did not resolve in a day. It stretched across months of filings, negotiations, medical updates, and evidence review. Prosecutors evaluated charges connected to leaving the scene of a crash involving serious injury, the way Maddie had been driving, the misleading information she had provided afterward, and alcohol-related conduct supported by the available evidence. I stopped following every headline. Justice looked less dramatic from close range than it did on television. Mostly, it looked like paperwork, waiting, lawyers returning calls, and families learning that one terrible night could keep arriving in pieces. Owen cooperated. That did not make him a hero. High lost his campaign job. Investigators examined why he had failed to call 911 after getting out of the SUV. Through his attorney, he admitted that fear for his career had mattered more to him in those first minutes than doing what he knew was right. I respected the admission more than I respected him. Dad's consequences came more slowly. There was no dramatic federal raid and no handcuffs at breakfast. Instead, investigators reviewed his recorded instructions, his later statements, and whether he had tried to shape testimony or create false uncertainty. Clients began leaving his consulting firm. 2 partners distanced themselves publicly. A third negotiated an exit for a man who had spent decades selling certainty. The most damaging thing was not one accusation. It was that people stopped trusting him to manage theirs. Mom was not criminally charged. The evidence did not support treating everyone in the room as equally responsible, and I was grateful for that distinction. But two nonprofit boards asked her to step aside while the matter remained public. Another organization allowed her to stay but replaced her as chair. A friend later described the meeting to me. Mom walked into the conference room and found someone else sitting in the chair she had used for 9 years. No one insulted her. The new chair simply said, "Linda, we're going to let someone else facilitate today." I understood why that hurt her. For people who build their identity around being listened to, losing authority can feel louder than punishment. Miguel Alvarez woke up 3 days after the crash. He faced surgery and a long rehabilitation. His daughter asked reporters to respect the family's privacy, and most eventually did. I did not send a letter. I asked the victim liaison to deliver one message only. Please tell the family I will respect whatever contact they want, including none. Weeks later, Detective Ruiz told me something Miguel had asked his daughter after waking. Did the driver stop? The question stayed with me. He had not asked whether she was famous. He had not asked whether she was sorry. He wanted to know whether, after being struck and left on a frozen street, the person behind the wheel had stopped. The collision might have taken 1 second. Everything after, it had been a choice. My own life did not continue untouched. The federal court temporarily reassigned several matters while ethics and conflict issues were reviewed. I disclosed my communications, stepped away from cases involving agencies connected to the investigation, and answered questions I would have expected any judge in my position to answer. My name appeared beside Maddie's in local coverage. Some colleagues became careful around me. Nothing in the review suggested wrongdoing. Still, doing the right thing did not mean walking away without a cost. By spring, I understood something I had once mistaken for pessimism. Integrity does not promise protection. It only tells you which losses you can still live with. I had lost certainty, privacy, and pieces of my work, but I had not lost the right to recognize myself again. 6 months after the crash, Maddie accepted a plea resolution. The final terms included a period of incarceration, probation, restitution, community service, and a long-term restriction on her driving. The agreement also resolved the remaining charges tied to what happened after the collision. I read the summary once. I did not feel victorious. A sentence could mark responsibility. It could set boundaries around what the law would tolerate. It could require money, time, supervision, and consequences. But it could not give Miguel Alvarez back. The winter night he had been walking home before my sister's SUV entered the crosswalk. It could not give his daughter back the hours she had spent waiting to learn whether her father would wake up. There are losses the law can recognize without being able to reverse them. 2 weeks after the plea, a letter arrived from Maddie. It was 4 pages long and written by hand. I expected explanations. There were some. She wrote about Dad's obsession with image, Mom's fear of public embarrassment, and the pressure she had carried for years. But then she wrote something different. Dad taught me how to protect an image, but he didn't make me leave that street. I stopped reading. When I continued, the next paragraph hurt more. When I asked who would believe you, I was not panicking. I wanted you to feel small. I knew our family had spent years teaching you not to expect to be seen, and I used that against you. There was no but, no sentence explaining why fear had made it understandable. At the end, she wrote, You don't owe me forgiveness or an answer. I read the letter twice. Then I cried. Not because everything was repaired, because, for the first time, Maddie had described what she had done without asking me to carry part of the explanation for her. I did not call. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. For most of my life, I had believed forgiveness should come quickly if you were a good person. Now I understood that forgiveness offered too soon could become another kind of labor performed by the person who had already been hurt. Maddie needed to live inside her accountability without me turning it into comfort. My parents were different. Mom texted, "Life is too short for this," Dad sent. "The family has been punished enough." Neither message said, "We chose you because we thought your life was easier to spend." Neither said, "We were wrong." They wanted the distance repaired without naming what had created it. I answered once, "You keep asking me to repair the distance without naming what created it. Do not come to my home or courthouse. Do not send relatives to speak for you. If we ever have another relationship, it will begin with responsibility, not pressure." Dad called that cruel. Mom called it unnecessary. I did not respond. At Thanksgiving, Mom sent a photograph of the dining table, the same china, the same centerpiece. One chair was empty. "Your chair is still here," she wrote. I stared at the picture longer than I expected. Part of me remembered birthdays, burnt rolls, Maddie stealing food from my plate, Dad pretending not to notice when we laughed during grace. I missed them. That did not mean I was ready to return. An available chair is not the same thing as a safe place to sit. By December, I moved apartments after reporters had circulated enough details about my building that staying no longer felt private. Rachel Kim, a colleague from the courthouse, helped me pack. She carried books, labeled boxes, and never asked me to explain why I had kept so many old files. That evening, after the movers left, we sat on the floor of my new living room eating takeout from paper containers. Rachel looked toward the dark windows. "Want me to stay tonight?" My answer came automatically. "I'm fine." The words were already in the room before I realized what I had said. Rachel did not argue. She only nodded and reached for her coat. "Actually," I said. She stopped. For a moment, asking felt harder than standing in front of my family and saying no. "Yes, stay." Rachel put her coat back over the chair. Nothing dramatic happened. We finished dinner. She slept on the couch. I slept better than I had in months. For the first time, strength did not mean proving I could be alone. It meant trusting someone to let them remain when I was tired. 1 year after the crash, I returned to a life that looked almost ordinary from the outside. The ethics review had ended months earlier. The court found no misconduct. I had reported the collision promptly, used no judicial authority to influence the investigation, and followed every conflict procedure required of me. There was no triumphant return, no applause. Just a cold Monday morning, a stack of motions on my desk, coffee cooling beside my keyboard, and the quiet relief of doing work that did not require me to explain my family. In my new apartment, I hung my commission near the entryway, not under a spotlight, not above the fireplace, just where I could see it when I came home. For years, I had hidden achievements because I thought modesty meant making myself smaller around people who were uncomfortable when I took up space. I no longer believed that. The commission was not proof that I mattered. It was proof that I did not need to erase what mattered to me. After the legal proceedings ended, I sold the SUV. There was nothing wrong with the repaired vehicle. It had not betrayed anyone. But some objects become containers for memories. And I did not want to keep meeting that night in the parking garage. Rachel had a spare key to my new place. One afternoon, she texted, "Can I use the key and drop the books inside?" I smiled when I read it. She already had access. She still asked. It was such a small thing. But I understood something I should have learned years earlier. Access is not entitlement. Trust is not ownership. Love is not permission. Maddie and I were not reconciled. Through counsel, I heard she was making restitution payments, following the terms of her supervision, and refusing interview requests that invited her to blame Dad, Mom, or me. She had not used our mother to carry messages. She had respected the silence I asked for. Sometimes I wondered whether that meant there might be a road back to each other. Maybe someday, not today. My feelings toward my parents remained harder to name. I still loved them. I still missed versions of them. But I no longer rescued them from the discomfort created by their choices. I no longer mistook guilt for obligation. For most of my life, I thought being the strongest person in the family meant being able to carry the most. I was wrong. Strength is not the ability to endure forever what should never have been placed on your shoulders. An accident can happen in seconds. A lie is built one choice at a time. Healing can be built the same way, not through one grand moment, but through hundreds of smaller decisions in which you stop allowing your life to become the place where other people send their consequences. I used to hear, "Evie will be fine," and take pride in it. Now, when someone asks how I am, I answer honestly. Sometimes I am fine, sometimes I am not. Neither answer makes me weak. Being the strong one should never mean being the disposable one. So I want to ask you something. If someone you loved once tried to sacrifice your future, but later accepted responsibility without excuses, would you leave a path open for them to return? Or are some boundaries meant to be rebuilt from the ground up? Share what you think in the comments. And if you value stories about family, truth, boundaries, and choosing self-respect without losing compassion, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.